Bad things happen in everybody's life. And the big question that has puzzled people for generations is, why does it happen? Sometimes there is a fairly obvious cause. A person has been reckless, although that doesn't really explain it, because recklessness just increases the probability. The thief gets away with it the first few times. It's only when he persists that he will be caught. And a similar question comes whether we recognise God or not, because we are, as it were, born blind. We don't know about God at birth. We are first told about him, and then some of us come to experience him, but many people do not. Jesus declared himself the light of the world, but the Jews around him debated, where is this man from? And they were very reluctant to accept his answer, which was that he was from God, he was from above, he was from the Father. And yet they had no explanation for the power that he had to heal, or the fact that he was very patient, that he went around doing good, and they could not find fault with him, either in his actions or in his arguments, although they did not accept his arguments. They couldn't see it, they couldn't accept it. After one of these discussions in Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples, walking through Jerusalem, came upon a man who had been born blind. And the disciples asked, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. His explanation for this man's blindness was that it was an opportunity for God to show himself to people, and particularly for him to show his power at work, for he was the light of the world, and he would give light to this man who was in darkness. Natural sight and spiritual sight. If everything went well with us all the time, we would not realize that we were completely dependent on God for everything. And yet we are. And yet we take it so much for granted. Because we have a part to play, we think that we have the only part to play. But it is God who sends the rain. It is God who created all the plants and animals. He made the rules of society. And he's given us his word, so that if we walk according to his word, things will go better for us, just as the young man who obeys the speed limits is more likely to survive to adulthood than the young man who races down the country road and loses control on the gravel. Jesus spat on the ground and made some mud and put it on this man's eyes and sent him to the pool Siloam, where he washed and came back seeing. And people were surprised, for they recognized him. But how can this man see? He explained that a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So he went and washed and received sight. They took the man who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. It was the Sabbath day when Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes, and the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. This division reflects the response that we make to the things that God does around us. Normally we would rejoice that a man who has been born blind was able to see. But that doesn't come into the thinking of some Pharisees. They are concerned that Jesus is doing something that isn't on their list of approved activities. That is, he has healed a person. Since he is doing something not on their list of approved activities, he must be bad. He cannot possibly be from God, because God would keep their rules. Others said, but he's healed a man who was born blind. Surely that shows he has come from God, because it's something that an ordinary man cannot do. They asked the blind man again, "What do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes." The man said, "He is a prophet." But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." They again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." Then they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" They reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share these verses. From John chapter 9, verses 13 to 28. First of all, the man has no idea other than the name Jesus. A man called Jesus. That's his testimony of Jesus. Told me to do something and I did it and I can see. But as time goes on and he hears this debate going on, he makes up his mind. This man must be from God. The Pharisees had laid it out. Is this man a sinner, or is he from God because he can do such signs? And the man has said he is a prophet. Those Jews who do not want to acknowledge that Jesus is from God have to come up with an explanation, and their first attempt is to say, this is just a fraud. Jesus is a deceiver. The man wasn't blind in the first place. While his neighbours knew him, the Pharisees in the synagogue did not know him. They managed to locate his parents and ask them 3 questions. Is this your son? And they affirm yes. Who you say was born blind? And they affirm that. How then does he now see? Well, they refuse to answer that question, saying, we don't know. But the reason that they would not say is that they felt intimidated by the Pharisees. The Pharisees had already declared that if anyone confessed Jesus, they would be thrown out of the synagogue. They would be excommunicated from the society. Intimidation is Satan's tool, not God's tool. But this proved that the man had been born blind. So they called him again and tried to get him to admit, we know that this man is a sinner. Well, the blind man is not able to judge that issue, but he declares what he knows. I was blind, now I see. And when they press him, he asks them, do you want to become his disciples? So he's now thinking, he is a prophet. I must follow him. Do you want to follow him too? But their reaction is no. You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. It always comes back to that issue. What authority does Jesus have? Who is he? Where is he from? And the evidence is in front of them, but they refuse to accept it. While we may not be able to answer all the questions that the skeptics will pose, we must testify to what we know. I was blind, but now I see.